All right, so now we're going to take a look at camera stabilization. Now, what this typically means is like a tripod or a monopod or something that helps you keep your camera still. Now, most of the time these days with the quality of these cameras, you don't really need to hold them still to get your shot. They're so fast and sharp that you typically don't have this type of problem where you end up with blur in your shot or something like that. At weddings, I take a tripod with me just in case, but 99.9% of the time I'm not using a tripod. This was the first tripod that I ever purchased. It's a Gitzo tripod, and I got it because it's super light and small, and it also extends out to be pretty tall. This fully extended will bring the camera higher than my eye level is, and that was pretty much the only feature that I wanted. I wanted to be able to get my camera up high, but I almost never use this. I use it with this basic Manfrotto ball head that's attached to it. This is a more entry-level ball head that I can use to angle my camera at different angles. So for example, if I expand this out here and set it down, and let's see, my ball head can move all the way around and also at certain angles here from side to side or full on 90-degree angles in either direction. And I can rotate it all the way around. I can also tighten this down a little bit so that there's a little bit of stiffness here so that I can make adjustments and angle my camera at the angle that I want it to be at. As far as the tripod itself, it also has an adjustment here so that I can move the head up and down away from the feet. So pretty neat options that this has. The tripod head that I use more commonly now is much beefier and has individual adjustments for all of these movements, so I could lock things down and then just move back and forth only or rotate only without affecting everything else. But like I said, I rarely use a tripod. I would suggest using a tripod in situations where the light is extremely low and you have to set your shutter speed to be really slow so that it lets more light in, and it might result in blur if you were holding your camera. So a tripod's good for that. Tripods are good for time lapses or also for taking bracketed amounts of photos for doing like HDR photography or something like that where each photo needs to be the same. Also, when you're compositing in Photoshop, which means taking multiple photos together and combining them to make one photo, you can use a tripod to get a clean photo of your environment, and then you can bring in your subjects or your people or objects or whatever into the photo and take another one. So that's another way of even compositing using tripods, just to keep the photo still and everything so that everything's consistent. And maybe another course I could talk about compositing, because you could really do some cool stuff with composites and make up for the fact that you might not have lighting equipment that you need and stuff like that. You can take a picture, if you're locked down on a tripod, take a picture of your scene and expose perfectly so that your scene looks good. And then you bring in your subjects and you expose perfectly for them and then take the picture again. You can then pull those photos together in Photoshop, Photoshop out the background from the photos of your subject and combine those into one photo that looks pretty fantastic. Of course, it's going to take a lot more time than just dialing it all in first with the correct lighting and all that stuff, but you can do things like that with a tripod. And then, of course, sometimes cameras get heavy and it's easier to use a tripod than it is to hold it the entire time. So there are times when a tripod can become extremely useful in situations like what I've mentioned. So there are lots of different types of tripods, lots of different types of tripod heads. If you're wanting some sort of a stabilization that also helps you keep mobile, consider a monopod where you have just one leg coming out of the bottom of your what would be a tripod. So you have one leg coming out of the bottom of your camera and you're able to, place that foot on the ground and move your camera around however you need, pick it up and go whenever you need to without having to worry about three legs sticking out, which can be kind of annoying if you have to move around often. You'll notice that sports photographers use monopods a lot because they're using big, heavy lenses that are really hard to hold still because the lenses are really long and they get heavy. So they'll use monopods as stabilization. So there are lots of options. When we shoot video, we're using monopods a lot because the monopod helps keep really still, and it helps us still able to have movement and then pick it up and go at any time, and we don't have to worry about folding up tripod legs because you can't really carry a tripod when it's all out because you might trip or hit somebody or something for that matter. So tripods are good if your camera doesn't need to move or you don't want it to move on purpose. Monopods are great because they help stabilize while still giving you some mobility. And then, of course, if you want some stabilization without having anything attached to your camera, you're going to need to go with a lens that has stabilization in it, which will help make up a little bit of that shakiness or potential blurriness in your image as well. So there's several different ways that you can combat that. Of course, each option has its own drawbacks and its own pros as well. So depending on what you're trying to do will determine on what you need. But like I've always said, and just for my own practices, I want to remain as mobile as possible. So I want to have the least amount of stuff sticking out of my camera as possible to help keep me from running into things, taking too much time to get down low so I can get a low shot, or if I need to get up high. Another cool thing that a monopod can be used for, or even a folded tripod, if you want to hold your camera up really high, higher than you are, you could put it on the camera, set the timer, hold it up high, and take that shot. I've done that before and was able to get some pretty cool shots. So having some sort of stabilization can come in use for even other reasons other than just holding your camera still. However, I think having the monopod is the most flexible option, but also having the tripod is the most useful option when it comes to making sure that your photo everything stays framed up the same. I really like having the portraits in a wedding, or even just portraits in themselves, where you've got your camera on you've got it all set up, the horizon line and everything looks good in your photo, everything is lined up fine. You have people come in, you take the picture, you have a different group of people come in, you take the picture, the horizon and everything stays the same, and it's a lot less work that you have to do later on in Photoshop or Lightroom or something like that, where you're going to have to straighten photos and crop them to look right. So a good tripod can prevent extra work that you'll have down the road, but just like any tripod, it does limit you to being connected to the tripod. And then you have to have some sort of a plate on your camera as well, such as this little plate, which for me becomes something that makes my camera unstable when I go to set it down because it's such a small plate. However, this is a fairly standard in the industry plate for a camera, and I actually have a shoe on the bottom of my camera that this will work with. So I can actually slide my camera into this plate and have it lock right down into this Manfrotto plate, which is a great feature. It's just something that I don't use very often. So, and then with video, we use a larger plate, which is kind of obtrusive as well. So typically I try to go hands-free as much as possible, but there are situations when I'm doing composites, when I'm doing portraits, where I want to be locked down on a tripod so everything is consistent and will result in me having to do a lot less work later. So stabilization could also help in that fact as well, beyond the ability to just keep from shaky photos or blurry photos, which could be the result of your camera not being able to take a picture fast enough to capture that image fast enough to prevent the blur. So lots of forms of stabilization. Read online reviews, look and see what people are using these things for. There are so many different tripods and different types of monopods and tripods and ball heads and all sorts of different things. So find the one that works best for your needs. Go down to a camera store and play with some of the ones that they have before you make your decisions, and see what works best for your situation.